Welcome back to our AL Central division breakdowns with 3 up, 3 down in studio with Alex. We're hopping to our favorite team. I'm trying to hold in the excitement, but the fact is, they finished 81-81 last year. A very disappointing team that won the AL Central the year prior. The Chicago White Sox, after getting rid of the Hall of Fame manager Tony La Russa, the White Sox bringing in former Kansas City, I think, bench coach Pedro Gerfal to lead this bunch into the this 2023 season, hopping in on the White Sox roster. A team that only really signed one big free agent, being Andrew Benintendi, to the White Sox biggest contract in team history, a big whopping $75 million, bringing in a solid left-handed bat to fill in the left field position. Besides that, they plugged and played with some free agents. They re-signed on Elvis Andrus, and in terms of the rotation, they brought in Mike Clevenger, the very suspect, very controversial Mike Clevenger indeed. Unfortunately, it will have to be noted, they did lose starting closer Liam Hendricks to an unfortunate diagnosis with cancer. We hope he will be returning healthy as a person first and a ball player second. But we will miss the always enthusiastic Liam Hendricks on the mound on the south side with the Chicago White Sox. Alex, hop in. What do you think of this starting nine and this bench for the Chicago White Sox?
Yeah, I mean, so it's an interesting team. They come off probably the most disappointing season in the MLB last year. A team that I think a lot of people had picked for AL title, if not the World Series. It was just, there was so much talent there, and I think people had a ton of high hopes coming off two pretty good seasons where they were in the playoffs. But they lose Jose Abreu in this offseason, and that is kind of stemming from just a terrible 2 years under Tony La Russa, in which this team kind of lost its whole energy, and it went from rebuild to kind of this team that, without really missing the playoffs, had no energy about them and had no good vibes really. And obviously it culminates with them missing the playoffs, going 81-81 in a really bad division last year, just full of sloppy play across the board. You know, you could see the talent so many times throughout the year, and they just couldn't put it together, and they didn't seem like they were playing as a team, which I think gets overlooked in baseball a lot of the time. But it was a true thing, and they weren't running to first base. It was lazy, and it wasn't professional how they played.
Very frustrating.
Yeah, no, I think the whole MLB was frustrated by it because the team had so much potential, and to see them play like this was just kind of a disappointment. And a lot of the young stars, seemingly should have been stars, didn't take that next step, and they go make a big change at manager, go sign a guy Pedro Grifol, who's younger, seemingly has a lot of energy, and hopefully are going to change the narrative around this team, change how this clubhouse vibe is. But with that comes the loss of the franchise legend Jose Abreu, who has been a staple of this team for the last 10 years.
Yep.
Last 7-8 years, I should say. Been the best player on this team, obviously won an MVP, clubhouse leader, everything good that you want. And he kind of came out and said that, like, the clubhouse was separated last year. And he's like, it didn't feel like a family, and that's why he left. And he said before the year he was envisioning retiring there, and something changed last year. So that's obviously a huge red flag on this team right away, because a lot of the same players are back. Obviously some new additions, new manager, but how can that be shifted around when you have a guy who really wanted to play for this team say essentially it wasn't worth playing for anymore?
It's a very tough look. Obviously, Pito signed with the reigning champs, the Houston Astros, on a 3-year, $20 million deal a year. And the fact is he deserved it. And Alex is spot on. There was a discrepancy in this clubhouse that just kind of struck throughout the whole season. You saw injuries occur really quickly, as Alex hinted at, people not running to first. That was a little bit of attitude and injury-wise related. But the fact is this White Sox team severely underperformed. They tried an experiment, bringing in a Hall of Fame manager. It failed. I think everyone would say it failed. Yes, he did bring him to the ALDS one season after winning the division, but they were bounced in the first round by the Houston Astros, and this team expects a lot more with the young talent that they have built. They've signed the Cuban roster. They look to add Oscar Colas as the big rookie that they're hoping will shine through in the right field as they look to add Eloy Jimenez as a more permanent DH. But looking at the starting rotation in the bullpen, as I said, they did lose Liam Hendricks. Unfortunate, it is reality. But this starting rotation gained in Michael Clevenger. Yes, we did. He is as suspect and controversial as there is. The MLB did clear him, so he will be pitching for this team. But you do love to see the return of the guy that should have been a little bit closer in the Cy Young voting and was snubbed of an All-Star appearance. Dylan Cease, he returns in hopeful fashion as he did last season. And then you have Lance Lynn, who was excellent last night on the mound for the U.S. in the World Baseball Classic. And then you need a rebound year, and a rebound year from Lucas Giolito, a guy who looked like he finally pieced it together a few seasons ago, and it just didn't have it last season. And the fact is the White Sox need him to perform for this team to be competitive. It would be a hell of a 1-2-3 punch for a rotation. Then you kind of fill that in with Michael Clevenger, a former 2 starter, and then you hope that Michael Kopech continues taking the steps that he was showing throughout the early season last year before being shut down for the year. Alex, what do you got on the White Sox rotation, and then what do you got on the bullpen?
Yeah, so to start on the rotation, I think it's probably the most intriguing rotation in baseball because they were not good last year, with the exception of Dylan Cease, who had a Cy Young caliber year, struck pretty much everyone out. The rest was pretty bad. And there's a lot of reasons for optimism going into this year on the rotation. Dylan Cease looks like he got roughed up the other day in spring training. I don't think that's anything to worry about. You expect him to be the ace, opening day starter, be in contention for the Cy Young. That's the type of pitcher he is. He's entering his age 27 season. He should be that again. So you have that. Lance Lynn is healthy this year. Yep. Last year he didn't participate in spring training, and it seemed like it took him half the year that he played to really get back to form
and feel comfortable.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
So seeing him pitch now is really a big deal. The fact that he's pitching well, and if he can start the season healthy, that's a big deal. Giolito, another bounce back candidate, a guy who decided last offseason for some reason to put on a lot of weight. And not fat. Like, he just went to the gym and lifted. Like, it wasn't like a lack of effort.
He beefed up.
He thought it would be better to be big, but when you're 6'6" and have a big frame already, it's a little tougher to pitch, You don't need to be huge to throw well, and you could see it on the mound last year. He was struggling at times. It looked like he was holding that weight when he would pitch. He was sweating, like, profusely. It just looked like it was a struggle. He seemingly is pitching very well in spring training, and it seems like he took off the weight and is feeling a lot better. So that could be a huge rebound because this was like a true number 2 borderline ace for a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
Showed great potential. So that
he
would
was
be a
the
huge
ace
rebound.
Entering last season.
Exactly, and did it in the playoffs too. Like he was looking fantastic. Then you have Michael Kopech, one of the top pitching prospects in baseball a couple years ago, who showed flashes of being a fantastic starter last year. He was kind of on an innings limit, but again, a guy who there's a lot of hype in spring training right now, just in terms of like how much he's cleaned everything up.
Yep.
And he has the 100-mile-an-hour fastball in his bag, but I don't think he's going to have to use it this year. And I think he's going to come in with a full arsenal. The changeup's working this year. He's got a great slider that's not like a Chris Sale. It's just a tight slider and then a very good curveball. So I'm looking for a big season from Kopech. Then Clevenger's is kind of like, he could be a really good signing in terms of how he pitches. I think it's a huge red flag that a locker room that needed help added a red flag in the locker room.
Not a great look.
Who has injury risk, who has like he's just a red flag waiting to happen. They paid him, I think, about $12 million a year, like a 1 year, $12 million deal, which is, it's not the big contracts you see in baseball, but that's a good amount of the salary cap the White Sox can spend, like figurative salary cap, of course. But I think they're looking for him to be the 5th starter, and I think I'm not saying I'm gonna like him as a player because I think he's kind of a scumbag, but on the field he could be a useful asset as a 5th starter if he can put in 150 to 180 innings of 4.5 ERA baseball, which I think he has the potential, maybe with a little bit more. He could be a good piece for this, and this could be looking like a really dangerous rotation if things fall the right way.
Yeah, no, without a question. And you kind of go into the bullpen, a team that beefed up on their bullpen last offseason and expected it to be as great as it was. And then, unfortunately, Garrett Crochet early in spring training needs Tommy John. You hope to see him return at some point this season. You kind of thrust Kendall Graveman, the last season's off-season acquisition, into the closer role. surrounded by Aaron Bummer, a guy that has a lefty slider and sinker that are nasty when it's on, but when it's off, it just struggles to find the strike zone. You hope for a bounce back year, a lot of bounce backs from a lot of guys on this roster in reality. But then again, Joe Kelly, another guy they needed to bounce back. It will be interesting. They did see Ronaldo Lopez take some serious, excellent steps as the long-term reliever for this bullpen as he continues to develop. We'll see what happens. Any final thoughts on the bullpen before we move into our X Factor and predictions with this team?
Yeah, I think the bullpen is a huge question mark right now. Obviously, you lose one of the best closers in baseball in Liam Hendriks. Guy's been a staple on this team the last 2 years before coming down with cancer, which is obviously super unfortunate. No timetable on that return. Just hoping he gets healthy. Garrett Crochet, we expect him to pitch this year. He had mentioned that he hoped to get back on track to be a starter, which is what he was drafted as. I think he's going to be used in the pen this year, but that disconnect is seemingly from the public eye, not one that you love. But then you're relying a lot on Kendall Graveman, Aaron Bummer, Joe Kelly, a lot of guys who were inconsistent last year and didn't really show like the clean, I don't know, just consistent performances that a guy like Liam Hendriks did.
Well, I think Graveman will step into a role he is very familiar with, as he did it in Seattle before being traded, and also in Toronto and other places as well. It was one of his highest innings pitched last season in a relief role, a little bit different than what he's expecting. Hopefully something that's a little bit more familiar to him will bring some comfort, and less innings pitch will bring some more performance from him. But I agree. I mean, Aaron Bummer and Joe Kelly, I mean, they have to step up. They have to be reliable.
Totally.
And they have to. And in Bummer's case, you got to stay healthy.
And the whole bullpen is going to be relied upon heavily this year. Like, Joe Kelly has a clause in his contract. He does not have to pitch back-to-back days if he doesn't want to, which is a shocking thing that a player can just say that, but that's how it is.
It says a little bit about his desire, in my opinion. But
yeah, and it might, I don't know. Like, if he's going to pitch well every other day, fine. He wasn't. Aaron Bummer has not stayed healthy. When he pitches, he's dynamite. I mean, like, he has some control issues sometimes, but year after year, he has 2 ERAs in the 2s and low 3s. So, like, this is a guy, if he stays healthy, he's going to be a huge piece. Ronaldo Lopez, you look for a repeat of last year. And then you're going to rely a lot. That's just 4 guys right there. Mm-hmm. Hopefully Crochet comes back, but then you're looking at, like, Jose Ruiz, Jake Diekman. They need to put in valuable innings. And it's a question mark. It's a big question mark as to whether they can. Is somebody going to come up from the minors that they're going to develop and see what happens there? Who knows? But that's going to be important for this team. How does the bullpen play, obviously, with the huge hole of Liam Hendriks?
Without a question. Let's get into our breakdowns of who we think is going to be the X factor for this White Sox team. Do you want to lead us off?
Yeah, I will lead us off. And as you guys may have heard, I mean, like, I think every single player on this team is a question mark, besides maybe Tim Anderson. Maybe not Benintendi either. I think, like, but pretty much everyone else is. You could. And some of those starters aren't either, but you could pick and choose pretty much anyone from this lineup as an X factor, just given the variance of what they could be and what they could not be, you know? So with that being said, I am going to go with Eloy Jimenez. This is a guy who we see Jose Abreu leaving that run producer role. Eloy Jimenez is going to be the cleanup hitter for this team, slotted right behind Benintendi, Luis Robert, and Tim Anderson. That is a run-producing opportunity pretty much every game. Those are 3 guys who can run the bases, get on base, wreak havoc. Eloy Jimenez is going to need to drive in at least 100 runs and hit like 35 homers if this team is going to be good. And he certainly has that in him. Again, going into the year healthy will be huge for him. He's playing in the World Baseball Classic for the Dominican.
Yep.
I think those are good vibes for all those players who get that opportunity, especially the Dominicans, you know. The vibes are high on the Dominican team, so I'm looking for Eloy to hit 40 bombs, 120 RBIs for this team to be really good.
No, absolutely. I mean, if healthy, it's a guy that a lot of people believe can hit 45 home runs. So we'll see what happens with Eloy Jimenez. I'm going to put the pressure on Andrew Vaughn in his first full year, in his first year at his natural position, stepping in for a guy like Jose Abreu. You got to be clutch, you got to be reliable, and you got to hit. So I'm putting the pressure on Andrew Vaughn to perform at first base for this White Sox team. He will get some help with a little bit of a platoon, I believe, with Gavin Sheets. But Andrew Vaughn, you need to come up clutch for this White Sox team. That's where I'm putting my cards in the basket. Let's take a look. Where are we projecting this team? I've got them finishing first in the Central. And it's a lot of question marks, like we said, but I see this as a bounce-back year under a new manager, and hopefully a lot of excitement on the south side for the Chicago White Sox, finishing first in the AL Central.
Yeah, I got the same. I think one of the things I made a point about with the Guardians is they make you beat yourself. And I think a team at the top of their game, we saw this a little bit in the Yankees series, a team at the top of the game can beat the Guardians because they may not have the most high-end talent. I think this White Sox team, when I say there's a lot of question marks, there's a lot of really good question marks to have too, in a boatload of potential that had this as like a World Series favorite going into last year. You're banking on a lot of stuff happening here, but I just think there's too much talent across this lineup. I think the shift will help them because they seemingly did not know how to utilize that under La Russa. New manager, new energy. It's going to be huge the first month of the season to see how this team starts. If they start slow, I don't like the pick at all. If they start hot, I think this is the best team in the AL Central. I think the rotation is elite, and I think the lineup should be elite.
Well, no better way to start the year off in Houston for the banner ceremony as the Astros raise their 2022 World Series champ flag. The White Sox will be in attendance, and Jose Abreu will be on the other side, so it might be an emotional one for the White Sox and for Abreu, but hopefully the Sox can respond in a better fashion this season. That breaks down the Chicago White Sox for this AL Central breakdown. Take a peek at all our breakdowns. Give them a like, a subscribe, check out our page. We appreciate any comments, any feedback, anything we may have missed. But yeah, that wraps up the Chicago White Sox breakdown.